The sound of the excavator's engine echoed through Maple Street as Sarah watched her dream pool disappear beneath tons of fresh concrete. But when Karen, from 3 houses down, knocked on her door with a petition signed by half the neighborhood, demanding she rebuild it, Sarah realized her quiet suburban life was about to become a battlefield. What Karen didn't know was that Sarah had discovered something buried beneath that pool, something that would turn their entire street upside down and expose secrets that the hydraulic hiss of the excavator cut through the morning air like a mechanical scream. Sarah Chen stood at her kitchen window, coffee mug trembling in her hands, watching as the massive yellow machine tore into what had once been her backyard paradise. Each bite of the steel bucket sent chunks of concrete and twisted rebar flying, systematically destroying the kidney-shaped pool that had been the centerpiece of her property for the past 15 years. "You sure about this, Mrs. Chen?" called out Miguel, the demolition foreman, his voice barely audible over the engine noise. He'd asked her the same question 3 times since arriving at dawn. Sarah stepped onto her back deck, her bare feet instantly cold against the October morning chill. "I'm sure," she shouted back, though her voice cracked slightly. The pool had been David's obsession, his weekend project that turned into a 2-year construction nightmare. Now, 3 months after the divorce papers were finalized, she couldn't bear to look at it anymore. Every ripple on the water's surface reminded her of broken promises and shattered dreams. The machine's bucket suddenly stopped mid-swing, caught on something beneath the shallow end. Miguel killed the engine and jumped down to investigate, his boots squelching in the muddy mixture of dirt and pool debris. "What is it?" Sarah called, out, walking closer to the destruction. Miguel was crouched near the concrete wreckage, brushing dirt away from something metallic. "Looks like some kind of box. Heavy duty, been down there a while by the looks of it." Sarah's heart skipped. When they'd built the pool, David had insisted on personally overseeing the excavation. He'd sent her away for that entire weekend, claiming he wanted to surprise her with the progress. She'd returned to find the hole completely dug and ready for the concrete pour. "Can you pull it out?" "Yeah, but we'll need to be careful. Don't want to damage whatever's inside." 20 minutes later, Miguel and his crew had extracted a waterproof metal case, roughly the size of a large toolbox, from what had been the deep end of the pool. Sarah's hands shook as she examined the heavy padlock securing it shut. "Want me to cut it open?" Miguel offered, producing a pair of bolt cutters from his truck. Before Sarah could answer, a sharp voice cut across the yard. "Excuse me, what exactly is going on here?" Sarah turned to see Karen Whitmore marching across the lawn, her perfectly coiffed blonde hair barely moving despite her aggressive stride. Karen lived 3 houses down in the largest home on Maple Street, a colonial monstrosity that she and her husband Gerald had renovated to within an inch of its life. She was the self-appointed president of their unofficial homeowners association, and had opinions about everything from lawn maintenance to acceptable mailbox colors. "I'm having my pool removed," Sarah said, keeping her voice level despite the irritation rising in her chest. "Removed?" Karen's voice pitched higher, as if Sarah had announced she was demolishing the entire house. "But Sarah, that pool is gorgeous. It's been the crown jewel of our neighborhood for years. Gerald and I have always admired it during our evening walks. Well, it's my pool, and I don't want it anymore." Karen's eyes narrowed as she surveyed the destruction. The excavator had reduced the once pristine backyard to a muddy crater filled with broken concrete and twisted metal. "This is going to absolutely destroy our property values. Do you have any idea what this will do to the neighborhood aesthetic?" "I really don't care about the neighborhood aesthetic right now, Karen." "Well, you should care." Karen's voice was rising to that particular pitch that signaled she was building toward one of her legendary tirades. "We all have investments to protect here. That pool was a selling point for this entire block. People would drive by just to see it." Sarah felt her patience evaporating like chlorine in the summer sun. "The pool is gone. Karen, deal with it." But Karen wasn't finished. Somehow managing to stay clean despite the muddy battlefield of Sarah's backyard, "I'm calling an emergency neighborhood meeting. This affects all of us. You can't just make unilateral decisions that impact everyone's home values." "Watch me," Sarah said, turning back toward Miguel, who was standing awkwardly with the bolt cutters, clearly uncomfortable with the domestic drama unfolding around him. "I'm serious, Sarah. I'm going to petition the city council if I have to." There are ordinances about maintaining neighborhood standards. Sarah spun around, finally losing her composure. Karen, my husband, left me for his 25-year-old dental hygienist, cleaned out our joint accounts, and stuck me with a mortgage I can barely afford on my teacher's salary. So forgive me if I'm not particularly concerned about your property. Values right now. Miguel cleared his throat uncomfortably. Karen's face flushed red, but instead of backing down, she seemed to gather herself for another assault. I understand you're going through a difficult time, but that doesn't give you the right to get off my property. Sarah's voice was deadly quiet. Excuse me, I said, get off my property, now. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Finally, she composed herself enough to speak. Fine, but this isn't over, Sarah, not by a long shot. She turned and stalked. Back across the lawn, her white sneakers squelching slightly in the damp grass. Miguel waited until Karen disappeared around the front of the house before speaking. Rough neighbor? You have no idea, Sarah muttered. Go ahead and cut the lock. The bolt cutters made quick work of the padlock, which fell away with a metallic clang. Sarah's hands trembled as she lifted the heavy lid of the case. Inside, wrapped in layers of heavy plastic, were stacks of documents, photographs, and what appeared to be a small digital recorder. The top photograph made her blood run cold. It showed Karen Whitmore, but not as the prim neighborhood busybody Sarah knew. This Karen was younger, her hair different, and she was standing next to a man Sarah didn't recognize in front of what looked like a government building. Both were holding badges. Sarah's fingers fumbled as she lifted the photo, revealing another. One beneath it, this one showed the same man, but he was lying motionless on the ground, blood pooling beneath his head. A time stamp in the corner read, 15 years ago. Mrs. Chen, you okay? Miguel's voice seemed to come from very far away. Sarah's vision blurred as she rifled through more photographs. Karen, in different outfits, different hairstyles, but always with the same cold expression, documents with official seals. Bank records showing large cash deposits. And at the bottom of the case, a manila envelope with Sarah's own name written on it in David's familiar handwriting. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper with David's handwriting. Sarah, if you're reading this, something has happened to me. Karen Whitmore isn't who she says she is. Her real name is Catherine Moreau, and she's been in witness protection for the past 16 years. The man in the photos was her FBI handler. She killed him when she found out he was planning to expose her real reason for entering the program. She's been watching our house ever since we moved in. She knows I found out who she really is. If something happens to me, take this to Agent Martinez at the FBI field office. Trust no one else. Sarah's hands were shaking so violently she could barely hold the paper. She looked up to find Miguel staring at her with concern. Ma'am, you look like you've seen a ghost. Sarah's phone buzzed in her pocket. A text message from an unknown number. Saw your little excavation project today. We need to talk. Meet me at Riverside Park, East Entrance, 8 p.m. tonight. Come alone. Don't involve the police, or you'll end up like David K. The phone slipped from Sarah's nerveless fingers and landed in the mud with a soft splash. David hadn't left her for another woman. David was dead, and the woman who'd killed him had been living 3 houses away for the past 2 years. Playing the role of concerned neighbor while watching Sarah's every move, as if summoned by her thoughts, Sarah caught a glimpse of movement in an upstairs window of the Whitmore house. A figure stood silhouetted against the glass, too far away to make out clearly. But Sarah knew with bone-deep certainty that Karen was watching her, had been watching her all along. Miguel was saying something about finishing the job tomorrow, about the concrete truck that was scheduled to arrive in the morning to fill in the crater. But Sarah barely heard him. Her mind was racing, trying to process the impossible reality that her quiet suburban life had been built on a foundation of lies and murder. She thought about all the times Karen had shown up unannounced, always with some neighborly excuse. The way she'd insisted on watering Sarah's plants when she and David went on vacation. How she'd known details about their lives that Sarah had never shared with her. The questions that had seemed like friendly Sarah's hands moved on autopilot as she pulled every curtain and blind in the house closed, transforming her bright kitchen into a dim cave. The ringing had finally stopped, but the silence felt even more threatening than the electronic assault. She set the metal case on her kitchen table and spread its contents across the surface like pieces of a deadly puzzle. The photographs were worse than she'd initially realized. Not just the obvious crime scene shots, but surveillance photos spanning years. Karen or Catherine, as David's note had called her, entering and leaving various locations, meeting with different people in parking lots and restaurants. And most disturbing of all, photos of David himself, taken with a telephoto lens. David getting his morning coffee. David at the hardware store. David in their own backyard, completely unaware that his every move was being documented. Sarah's phone buzzed. Another text from the unknown number. You're looking at the photos. Good. Now you understand what happens to people who get too curious. Sarah's blood turned to ice. Karen could see her. Right now. Through the closed curtains, somehow Karen was watching her examine the evidence of her own crimes. Sarah grabbed a chair and wedged it under the back door handle, then did the same with the front door. It was a pathetic defense against someone who had killed a federal agent, but it made her feel marginally less exposed. The landline rang again. This time, Sarah snatched it up on the first ring. "What do you want?" she hissed. Such hostility, Sarah. Karen's voice was completely different now. Gone was the artificially sweet tone she used for neighborhood pleasantries. This voice was cold, controlled, professional. "I simply wanted to chat about your little renovation project." "David's dead, isn't he?" A pause. David made some very poor choices. He had a chance to walk away, to take his little discovery and disappear quietly. Instead, he decided to play hero. "You killed him." David killed himself the moment he decided to dig where he shouldn't have been digging. Literally, as it turns out, Karen's laugh was soft and utterly without warmth. "Did you really think that pool placement was your husband's idea?" "I suggested that exact spot during one of our friendly neighborhood chats. I knew what was buried there, and I knew eventually I'd need to move it." Sarah's legs gave out, and she sank onto one of her kitchen chairs. "The car accident, ... wasn't an accident. Though I'll give David credit, he was more resourceful than I expected. He managed to hide that case before our final conversation. Took me 2 years to figure out where he'd put it." The pieces clicked into place with horrible clarity. Karen's sudden interest in becoming friends after David's death, her helpful offers to maintain the pool during Sarah's period of grief, her insistence on the specific pool cleaning schedule that kept Sarah away from the backyard on certain days. "You've been looking for it this whole time." "Oh, Sarah, I've been doing so much more than that." Karen's voice carried a note of pride. "Do you think it was coincidence that your mortgage company suddenly became so understanding about your late payments, that your principal was so accommodating about your leave of absence? I've been managing your entire life, keeping you stable and predictable while I searched for David's little insurance policy." Sarah's mind reeled. Every kindness, every break she'd caught in the past 2 years had been orchestrated by the woman who'd murdered her husband. "But now," Karen continued, "you've gone and made things complicated. That dramatic pool removal, the public spectacle with the excavator, you've forced my hand." "The petition," Sarah whispered. "You're not really going to petition the city." "Oh, but I am. In fact, I've already started gathering signatures. Amazing how concerned your neighbors are about property values. They're practically lining up to demand you restore the pool to its original condition." Sarah could hear the smile in Karen's voice, and it made her skin crawl. "Here's what's going to happen, Sarah. You're going to have that pool rebuilt. Exactly where it was, exactly how it was. And you're going to bury that case right back where David hid it. Think of it as his permanent grave marker. And if I refuse, then you'll join him. But not before I've had some fun with your sister in Portland. Such a lovely family she has. I particularly enjoyed watching little Emma at her soccer practice last Saturday. She's got quite a kick for a 7-year-old. Sarah's vision grade. At the edges, you stay away from them. That's entirely up to you. Rebuild the pool, rebury the evidence, and your family stays safe. Try to be clever, try to involve the authorities, and I'll start eliminating threats to my security. Your choice." The line went dead. Sarah sat frozen in her kitchen chair, staring at the photographs scattered across her table. In one of them, taken with a telephoto lens, she could see her sister Jenny pushing Emma on a swing set. The timestamp showed it was from last weekend. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a photo message, Emma walking out of her elementary school, her pink backpack bright against the gray October sky. The photo had been taken today. Sarah's hands shook as she reached for her laptop. She needed to call Jenny, needed to warn her, but first she had to understand exactly what she was dealing with. She typed Catherine Moreau, FBI, into the search engine. The results were limited, but what she found made her stomach turn. 15 years ago, Catherine Moreau had been a low-level accountant for a criminal organization in Detroit. When the FBI had moved to arrest her employers, she'd turned state's evidence in exchange for witness protection. But according to the few news reports Sarah could find, the case had fallen apart when the FBI's key witness, Catherine herself, had disappeared just days before the trial. The official story was that she'd been murdered by associates of the crime family she'd agreed to testify against. Her body had never been found. Her FBI handler, Agent Michael Torres, had also died under mysterious circumstances around the same time. Officially ruled a mugging gone wrong. But Sarah now knew the truth. Catherine Moreau had killed her own handler and disappeared into witness protection anyway, using documents she'd presumably stolen or forged. She'd been living as Karen Whitmore for 16 years, long enough to establish a completely new identity, marry Gerald Whitmore, and integrate herself into suburban life. Sarah wondered if Gerald knew who he'd married. Based on Karen's confidence, Sarah suspected he was either complicit or completely in the dark. Either way, he wasn't going to be any help. A soft knock at the front door made Sarah's heart stop. She crept to the window and peered through a gap in the curtains. Miguel stood on her front porch, his work cap in his hands. Sarah opened the door just enough to speak through the chain lock. "Mrs. Chen, I wanted to make sure you were okay. You seemed pretty shaken up after we found that box." "I'm fine," Sarah lied. "The thing is, we're supposed to finish the job tomorrow, but I'm thinking maybe you want to take some time to process. Whatever was in there, we can push back the concrete pour if you need." Sarah's mind raced. The concrete pour, if she went through with it, she'd be destroying any chance of recovering more evidence. But if she stopped it, Karen would know she was planning something other than compliance. "Actually, Miguel, I've changed my mind about the whole project." His eyebrows rose. "You want to keep the crater? I want you to rebuild the pool, exactly how it looked." Miguel looked confused. "Ma'am, that's going to cost a lot more than just filling it in. You're talking about a complete reconstruction." "I know. How long would it take?" "Well, if we're doing it right, 4 to 6 weeks. Maybe longer if we run into complications." 6 weeks. Sarah's mind seized on the timeline. 6 weeks to figure out how to survive this nightmare, how to protect her family, how to bring a killer to justice without ending up dead herself. That's perfect. "Can you start tomorrow?" I guess. I'll need to order materials, get permits, but yeah, we can start tomorrow." "You want the exact same design?" "Identical, down to the last detail." After Miguel left, Sarah returned to her kitchen table and the scattered evidence of Karen's crimes. She photographed every document, every picture, uploading them to a cloud storage account Karen couldn't access. Then she carefully repacked everything except David's note, which she tucked into her purse. As night fell, Sarah realized she had no intention of meeting Karen at Riverside Park. That would be suicide. Instead, she was going to do something Karen wouldn't expect. She was going to fight back. But first, she needed allies. People Karen couldn't threaten or eliminate. People with the power to take down a woman who'd been successfully hiding in plain sight for 16 years. Sarah pulled out her phone and began researching FBI field offices. Agent Martinez, the name David had mentioned in his note. If he was still alive, still working, he might be her only chance. As she searched, her doorbell rang. A police car sat in her driveway, and Officer Janet Rodriguez from the local precinct stood on her porch. Sarah's heart hammered as she opened the door. Had Karen called the police? Was this some kind of trap? "Evening, Mrs. Chen. Sorry to bother you, but we've had reports of some unusual activity in the neighborhood today. Something about excavation work and a domestic disturbance." Sarah's mouth went dry. "I was having my pool removed. It got a little heated with one of my neighbors, but nothing serious." Officer Rodriguez consulted her notepad. 3 weeks into the pool reconstruction, Sarah had become a different person. The grieving widow who'd stumbled through life in a fog of depression and financial anxiety was gone, replaced by someone harder, more focused, more dangerous. She'd learned to compartmentalize, to smile at neighbors while photographing their interactions with Karen, to maintain the facade of compliance while building her case, piece by methodical piece. The construction crew arrived each morning at 7 sharp, and Sarah made sure to be visible, playing the role of the neighbor who'd seen the error of her ways. She brought them coffee, asked about their progress, and made small talk about how much better the neighborhood would look once the pool was restored. It was a performance worthy of an Oscar, considering that every shovelful of dirt brought her closer to reburying evidence of her husband's murder. But Sarah wasn't just watching the construction. She was watching Karen. From her upstairs bedroom window, concealed behind sheer curtains, Sarah had documented Karen's daily routine with obsessive precision. Karen left the house every Tuesday and Thursday at exactly 2:17 p.m. Always dressed in workout clothes, carrying a gym bag that looked too light to contain actual exercise equipment. She returned exactly 2 hours later, but the bag looked heavier, and she always parked in the garage immediately instead of leaving her car in the driveway like other days. More importantly, Sarah had identified Karen's tells, the way she touched her left earring when she was lying, how her smile became more pronounced when she was planning something unpleasant, the slight tilt of her head when she was listening to conversations she wasn't supposed to be part of. Sarah had also been busy with her own Tuesday and Thursday activities. While Karen was away on her mysterious errands, Sarah had been conducting surveillance of her own. She'd discovered that Gerald Whitmore worked late every Monday and Wednesday, leaving Karen alone in the house. She'd documented which windows stayed lit and which rooms Karen used most frequently. She'd even managed to get close enough to photograph the license plates on the 3 different cars Karen drove, depending on where she was going. But Sarah's most important discovery had come from an unexpected source: the Riverside Elementary School's annual directory. While cross-referencing neighborhood residents, Sarah had noticed something odd about the Whitmore's entry. Gerald's information was complete workplace, education background, REFERENCES, from their previous address in Ohio. But Karen's section was sparse, listing only her current address and a vague reference to freelance consulting work. Sarah had spent hours researching Karen Whitmore's supposed background, and it was remarkably thin for someone who'd allegedly lived a full adult life before moving to Maple Street. No college records, no employment history, no social media presence that predated her marriage to Gerald. It was as if Karen Whitmore had materialized fully formed 6 years ago, when she'd married a recently widowed accountant who was too lonely to ask hard questions about his new wife's past. The breakthrough had come when Sarah found Gerald's first wife's obituary. Margaret Whitmore had died in a car accident 7 years ago, leaving Gerald devastated and vulnerable. Karen had appeared in his life less than 8 months later, the perfect grieving widow's companion who understood loss because she'd supposedly lost her own husband in a construction accident. Sarah wondered how many other widowed men Karen had auditioned before settling on Gerald, how many identities she'd tried on like clothes before finding one that fit her purposes. On this particular Thursday afternoon, Sarah sat in her car 3 blocks from the Riverside Park entrance, watching Karen's silver Honda Civic parked near the east gate. This was where Karen had demanded their meeting 3 weeks ago, the meeting Sarah had refused to attend. But Sarah had been watching the park ever since, and she'd noticed that Karen returned here frequently, always on Thursdays, always at the same time. Today, Sarah was going to find out why. Karen emerged from her car at exactly 4:30 p.m. and walked toward the park's memorial garden, the same confident stride Sarah had watched from her bedroom window countless times. But instead of her usual workout attire, Karen wore dark jeans and a black jacket. And she carried a different bag, smaller, more purposeful. Sarah waited 5 minutes before following, her heart pounding as she entered the park through the west entrance. She'd studied the layout obsessively, identifying sightlines and escape routes, preparing for this moment when she'd finally see Karen's secret routine up close. The memorial garden was a quiet section of the park, dedicated to local residents who'd died in military service. Karen stood before one particular headstone, her head bowed as if in prayer. From Sarah's position behind a cluster of oak trees, she could see Karen's lips moving, but couldn't hear the words. After several minutes, Karen knelt and placed something at the base of the headstone. Then she stood, looked around carefully, and walked back toward the parking area. Sarah waited until Karen's car disappeared before approaching the memorial stone. The name carved into the granite made her blood run cold. Agent Michael Torres, beloved son and servant of justice. The FBI agent Karen had murdered was buried here, in Sarah's own community, and Karen had been visiting his grave every week, playing the role of grieving friend or colleague. At the base of the headstone, Karen had left a single white rose and a small card. Sarah's hands shook as she picked up the card and read the message written in Karen's precise handwriting. "Still thinking of you, Michael. Your sacrifice wasn't in vain. KMKM, Catherine Moreau." Karen was signing her real name, her true identity, on condolence cards to the man she'd killed. It was either the ultimate act of psychological manipulation or evidence of a fractured mind that had convinced itself of its own lies. Sarah photographed everything: the headstone, the rose, the card, Karen's signature. Then she carefully replaced the items exactly as she'd found them and retreated to her car, her mind racing with implications. Agent Torres hadn't been buried under his real name. The dates on the headstone indicated he'd died 16 years ago. But the memorial suggested he'd been a local resident, not an FBI agent from Detroit. Either Torres had been working undercover in their community, or Karen had somehow arranged for his body to be buried here under false pretenses. That evening, Sarah sat at her kitchen table with her laptop, diving deeper into Agent Torres's background. What she found confirmed her darkest suspicions. Michael Torres had indeed been FBI, but his last known assignment had been investigating financial crimes in suburban communities, specifically cases involving witness protection, relocations, and identity fraud. Torres hadn't been Catherine Moreau's handler. He'd been hunting her. Karen had killed a federal agent who'd gotten too close to exposing her fake identity. Then she'd somehow arranged for his body to be buried in the very community where she was hiding, turning his grave into her private monument to successful deception. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Enjoyed your visit to the park today. Michael would have appreciated your interest in his memorial." Sarah's blood turned to ice. Karen had been watching her watch Karen. The hunter had become the hunted, and Sarah had walked directly into the trap. Another text arrived. "You're getting quite good at surveillance. Almost professional quality. Michael would have been impressed with your dedication." Sarah's hands trembled as she typed back, "What do you want?" The response came immediately. "The same thing I've always wanted, for people to mind their own business and let the dead stay buried. But you seem determined to dig up the past. You killed him." Michael killed himself when he decided to play detective instead of accepting the official story. Just like David killed himself when he decided to be a hero, just like you're killing yourself right now. Sarah stared at the screen, trying to formulate a response that wouldn't escalate the situation further. But before she could type anything, another message appeared. "Check your email." Sarah opened her laptop and found a message from an address she didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Family photos." Inside were surveillance photographs of her sister Jenny, her brother-in-law Mark, and little Emma. The photos had been taken over the past several days, documenting their routines with terrifying precision. Emma at school, Jenny at the grocery store, Mark leaving for work. Each photo was time-stamped, showing that Karen had been monitoring Sarah's family even while maintaining her surveillance of Sarah herself. The final image in the email was different. It showed Emma's bedroom taken from outside her window at night. Emma was visible in her bed, asleep, completely vulnerable, and unaware that a killer was photographing her through the glass. Sarah's phone rang immediately. She answered on the first ring, her voice shaking with rage. "You stay away from them." "Then stop digging, Sarah. The pool reconstruction is almost finished. Once you've reburied David's little treasure chest, this all goes away. Your family stays safe, you get to keep playing the grieving widow, and everyone wins. Everyone except David. Everyone except Agent Torres." Karen's laugh was soft and chilling. David and Michael made their choices. They both decided that the truth was more important than their lives. I gave them opportunities to walk away. They refused, and now you're giving me the same choice. I'm giving you a better